The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. With the news at this time, I am Tiana Jordan. A very good morning to you. First, the lead stories. The Public Accounts Committee has again reminded permanent secretaries and accounting officers to stop overpaying contractors. A group of Venezuelan nationals occupying an area in Anambisi, Port Kaituma, who are suffering from chronic malnutrition and waterborne diseases, is being monitored by the Health Ministry. The Health Ministry has recommended mix and matching COVID booster vaccine in some cases as it rolls out the program today. Criminal cases to be deferred following last Saturday's fire at the DPP's office. In regional news, protests are being planned in Barbados against the visit of Prince Charles for that island's transition to Republican status. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return-to-work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, which results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
And now the news in detail. The Public Accounts Committee, PAC, has again stated that government agencies making payments to ensure contractors are not overpaid are a frequent occurrence in agencies. Chairman of the PAC, Jermaine Figueroa, reminded that accounting officers of government agencies are to follow the advice of the Financial Secretary.
An advice from the Public Accounts Committee, PS, and this is an advice we have decided to give accounting officers coming before us, particularly with the issues of overpayment and the backlog keep reflecting itself in year after year's reports. And the Finance Secretary actually would have given us this advice. When you would have discovered these happenings that keep reflecting itself year after year, this is 2016, it's 5 years ago. The advice from the Public Accounts Committee is that you write the FS, explaining to him your efforts in getting the contractor to satisfy his obligation has failed, and you're asking for the FS to give consideration to write it off.
The PAC reminded officers as the committee was considering and questioned the overpayment of some $15 million to contractors for construction works at the Kaituma Hospital in 2011. Opposition PAC member Ganesh Mahipal urged the accounting officers of the Health Ministry and other agencies to check works before payments.
We are seeing large sums of monies being paid to contractors, and I will just like to state for the record purpose that it comes back to measuring the work and then issuing the payments. And I think that is a sore issue that we have found in this 2016 Auditor General's report. And I trust that the accounting officer will take note, as we would have guided all other accounting officers, that the engineering department and the technical officers need to play a greater role in ensuring that we pay for measured works.
The PAC heard that in several instances, files for contractors for which there were overpayments are missing and have to be reconstructed. Permanent Secretary Malcolm Watkins responding to a question from Government PAC member Dharm Kumar Siraj.
Mr. Chairman, 499, there's an issue of overpayment here. I note the PS response, but my direct question is that if in the research that was being done, if the contractor was notified of the overpayment and asked to repay the amount.
This position on this query remains the same as the last sit-in. We were unable to find any information pertaining to this project to date. So we would ask to continue to search to see what we can find on this query.
The ministry's accounting officers were urged to work with the National Administration and Tender Board to locate the files to ensure the debts are written off through a process to be initiated by the Financial Secretary or recover sums through legal proceedings. The Auditor General reports recorded for every agency instances of overpayment to contractors. The Health Ministry says it has assisted scores of Venezuelan nationals occupying an area in Anambisi, Port Kaituma, who are suffering from chronic malnutrition and waterborne diseases. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says health officials rushed to the area after reports of chronic malnutrition and severe diseases plaguing the migrants.
What we found generally in the camp is that it's very unhygienic because you have a lot of people living together. The team estimate that there are 198 persons living in very close proximity, and they're from 25 different families. Because of the unhygienic conditions, they're using the same water from the river, and they're using the river to wash and do other things there. So the water is not of good quality.
The health minister says a large number of children among the group who are sickened by waterborne diseases were assessed by the medical team.
At the time, while the reports were that there was severe malnutrition, what we found was that some of the children were chronically malnourished. I'm not too sure whether they have had prior medical attention, like things like vaccination and so forth. We also discovered that some of the children, they had severe skin rashes. Some of them had like upper respiratory infections, and quite a few of them had diarrheal diseases.
He says the team further discovered on Sunday that a number of adults were also sick.
We also, on Sunday, the team also saw 42 adults, and again, we saw similar types of illnesses among the adults, in addition to which we were able to detect among the group some cases of malaria. And again, they were given treatment based on the medical conditions that they had.
The health minister says the more than 15 families of Venezuelan migrants present no immediate threats but are living under deplorable conditions.
Well, where these persons are located, maybe about 5 minutes away, you probably have some persons, Guyanese, who are living there. So they have actually gone and settled in an uninhabited area. And so I don't think they're directly affecting anybody within that area. I think their challenge is how to maybe access food, maybe get some jobs. We were told that some of them would go to Port Kaituma to look for jobs. So they're trying to make a living.
Dr. Anthony says the ministry is monitoring the migrants medically and the Civil Defense Commission is assisting with essential items. The Ministry of Health has recommended the formula for persons requiring COVID vaccine boosters. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony, during Monday's COVID update, stipulated how the ministry will administer the boosters.
If you got 2 doses of Pfizer, then we're recommending that if you're doing a booster, that you get a Pfizer as your booster. If you had Moderna and Moderna, you can either do another Moderna as your booster, but right now we don't have that. But there's nothing wrong if you want to get a Pfizer as your booster. If you took a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, then after 52 days after, you can get a booster. With Sinopharm, if you had 2 doses of Sinopharm, then your booster should be a Sinopharm vaccine taken 3 to 6 months after your second dose.
The health minister says healthcare workers, persons over 18 years old with comorbidities, and those 50 years and older are entitled to get the boosters. Dr. Anthony further outlined the formula for the other vaccines used in Guyana.
If you did AstraZeneca, so you had 2 doses of AstraZeneca, then your third dose, you can either opt to get AstraZeneca again, or you can use an mRNA vaccine, which would be Pfizer. So 6 months after your second dose of AstraZeneca, you can get mRNA or a Pfizer vaccine to complement your AstraZeneca. If you took Sputnik V and you completed both doses, then you can take a J&J vaccine, and that would complement the series. So you can use the J&J as a booster.
The ministry began administering the booster doses as of Monday, November 22nd, 2021. The Health Ministry is reporting steady decline in positive COVID-19 cases. In the last 24 hours, the ministry says it recorded 31 new positive cases and a sharp decline in ICU cases to 9 cases. There are 77 people in the hospital. The data shows 1,729 other persons who tested positive were told to isolate themselves at home. The ministry recorded 1 COVID death, which took the death toll to 977. The ministry says as of Sunday, November 22nd, 396,042 or 77.2% of the adults are partially COVID vaccinated in Guyana, with 52% or 269,791 persons who are fully vaccinated. The ministry says there are 19,905 or 27% of children ages 12 to 17 years old fully vaccinated, and 28,709 or 39.4% partially vaccinated. And now in regional news. Demonstrations have been planned for the day on which Barbados is scheduled to transition to a republic. Barbados Today reports that this is because of an invitation extended from the government of Barbados to Prince Charles to attend the festivities as the guest of honor. He is to accept the prestigious Order of Freedom Independence Award. The planned protests have received the endorsement of an international relations specialist at the University of the West Indies, as well as an outspoken government backbench parliamentarian. In an interview with Barbados Today, General Secretary of the Caribbean Movement for Peace and Integration, David Denny, declared the inclusion of Prince Charles as an insult to Barbadian people. This, he says, is because of the role of the British monarchy in the proliferation of slavery and oppression in Barbados. He says if Barbados is breaking with the monarchy, then a representative should not be part of the process to become a republic. Trinidad and Tobago's Minister of Health, Terence Dale Singh, says that his country is in the midst of a third wave of COVID-19 infections. Speaking at the Ministry of Health's COVID-19 media briefing, Dale Singh explained that epidemiologists have deemed the rising COVID infections and deaths as a third wave of the pandemic since the rolling 7-day average of cases is now over 500 plus. The Twin Island nation experienced its first wave of COVID-19 infections in August of 2020, followed by a second wave in June-July 2021. Yesterday, the country recorded 10 additional deaths and 404 new COVID cases. This took the active cases to 8,695, with hospitalizations at a record high of 539 patients seeking care. Dale Singh says his ministry will be coordinating the role that the 5 emergency operations centers will play in the deployment of resources and personnel as the demand for treatment increases. He says herd immunity currently stood at around 45% and called on persons to make sure they took steps to protect children under 12 years who cannot access vaccines. Dale Singh again encouraged citizens aged 12 and over to get vaccinated. Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Browne is adamant that the offer of a compassionate settlement of 50% payable in cash, lands and bonds to severed Elliott workers is non-negotiable. He says union representatives have 2 choices: either accept or reject it. The declaration follows a push by Chairman of the Leeward Islands Airline Pilots Association, LIALPA, Captain Patterson Thompson, for a meeting with the Antiguan government to clarify concerns relating to the various offers that have been placed on the table for severance. LIALPA wants the Antigua and Barbuda government to pay $60 million in cash, but Mr. Browne says his government cannot afford it. He also disclosed that during a meeting with LIALPA, he indicated his willingness to pay 50% of the full staff liabilities. However, the cabinet decided against his recommendation and capped it at 50% of the severance. Captain Thompson said if the union does not get a favorable response to its request for a meeting, LIALPA will present what it has to its membership and ask each individual to make their own decision. And now for the international news, the latest coming from the BBC World Service.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. A bus from North Macedonia travelling through western Bulgaria has crashed, killing at least 46 holidaymakers, 12 of them children. The North Macedonian Prime Minister, Zoran Zaev, said a survivor had told him he'd heard a big explosion before the vehicle caught fire. Nick Thorpe reports.
According to emergency officials, the tourist coach caught fire and crashed at 2 o'clock in the morning local time on the Struma highway in western Bulgaria. Of the 53 people on board, 46 are now known to have died and 7 others taken to hospital in nearby Sofia. The dead and injured include children. According to the North Macedonian Foreign Minister, Bujar Osmani, the passengers were tourists returning to Skopje from a weekend in Istanbul.
China has warned Taiwanese companies trading on the mainland that they'll be punished if they support the island's independence movement. It follows the fining of the Taiwanese conglomerate Far Eastern Group in China. Robin Brandt is in Shanghai.
Pressure on Taiwan from a few dozen miles across the water comes in many forms. Beijing's latest attempt is to target companies from the island that are invested in the mainland, but which it says support full independence for Taiwan. Far Eastern Group confirmed that 2 of its units were fined for violating environmental, taxation or fire safety regulations. A Chinese government spokeswoman would only say that what she called die-hard politicians and their associated companies would be severely punished.
A presidential candidate in the Philippines has taken a cocaine test after the current leader, Rodrigo Duterte, suggested one of those standing was a user. Michael Bristow has the details.
Mr. Duterte said one of those aiming to take over his job as president had used cocaine on board yachts and private planes to avoid arrest. He said that person was from a well-known family. Many thought Mr. Duterte was referring to Ferdinand Marcos Jr., known as Bongbong, whose father used to rule the Philippines with an iron fist. To prove it wasn't him, the younger Mr. Marcos took a cocaine test, which was negative. Thousands have died. Sentences are expected to be an issue in next year's presidential election.
25 men have gone on trial in Sri Lanka in connection with the deadly Easter Sunday bombings in 2019. Among the defendants is Mohammed Nafur, who officials accuse of masterminding the attacks and who's been linked to the Islamic State group. In all, they're facing more than 23,000 charges, including conspiracy to murder, aiding and abetting the attacks, and collecting arms and ammunition. Defence lawyers say the charges are too numerous and the case could last 10 years. News from the BBC. The Belgian Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, and 4 of his ministers are self-isolating after the visiting French Prime Minister Jean Castex tested positive for COVID. They've taken tests and are awaiting the results. Mr. Castex visited Brussels on Monday. The head of the International Nuclear Watchdog has begun talks in Tehran as efforts continue to salvage the agreement on the Iranian nuclear program. The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, said he discussed several issues with Iranian officials, including the need for a peaceful nuclear program to produce clean energy because of the threat of climate change. An assessment by international health experts has concluded that almost half of the world's population suffers from a poor diet because people eat either too little or too much. The annual Global Nutrition Report found that malnutrition causes health issues for 48% of the world's population. The former president of South Korea, Jun Doo-hwan, whose iron-fisted rule following a 1979 military coup sparked massive street protests, has died at the age of 90. A former military commander, Jun presided over the infamous army massacre of thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators in Gwangju in 1980, a crime for which he was later convicted and received a commuted death sentence. Laura Bicker is in Seoul.
It's thought at least 4,900 students were murdered during those protests. He became known as the Butcher of Gwangju. He continued to rule all the way up until 1987. And then during 1987, there were more uprisings. Again, he tried to crack it down, but he could not get it under control. And eventually, he agreed to run democratic elections. These were seen as the first democratic elections ever held in South Korea. And they also meant that there was the first peaceful handover of power.
BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now to end the news, here's a recap of the leads. The Public Accounts Committee has again reminded permanent secretaries and accounting officers to stop overpaying contractors. A group of Venezuelan nationals occupying an area in Anambisi, Port Kaituma, who are suffering from chronic malnutrition and waterborne diseases, is being monitored by the Health Ministry. The Health Ministry has recommended mix and matching for COVID booster vaccine in some cases as it rolls out the program. Criminal cases to be deferred following last Saturday's fire at the DPP's office. In regional news, protests are being planned in Barbados against the visit of Prince Charles for the island's transition to Republican status. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.
News Talk Radio Guyana is the station for you, bringing you news updates every hour, major news 3 times a day, edutainment on a higher level, shows like Beat the Clock, Brunch on the Coast, The Afternoon Jam, Youth's Perspective. It's a station that goes wherever you go, streaming online at www.bit.ly/newstalk1031. It's News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM.